Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to Rastakhan on Mythic.
So this encounter is pretty similar to Heroic, however you can't really execute the exact same strategy you used, as all the abilities do a little bit more damage, and also a few of them have had mechanical tweaks. But let's jump into the start of the fight with Phase 1.
So let's get the main mechanical changes for you to keep note of out of the way first. There are more frogs to dodge. If you have DKs, they can use AMS and run over and soak the frogs before they're sent out. This isn't mandatory whatsoever, but it does prevent others from having to move, which is pretty nice, and rogues can do a similar job with Cloak. The beam that fixates a player also will leave fire behind them as it chases them. This of course doesn't change much, you still just want to run from it, but you also want to run away from everyone else as they stay clear from the patches that it leaves behind. The axe debuff is now thrown on multiple players and ticks way harder. Healers, you really need to top these players as soon as possible. Tanks, the Scorching Detonation really hurts, so you want your most mobile tank to take the majority of these to keep raid damage as low as possible throughout the fight. But that's all you need to know for now. Let's just show you how this first phase is played out.
So on the pool, everything is stacked underneath the throne and all DPS just nuke Roka. The plan here is that you only ever see Roka's leap cast once, so you want to nuke him down whilst cleaving onto everything else. Everything is tanked in this single spot until the first leap is cast, at which point all the adds are moved slightly round the corner. The boss remains by the throne, and is only moved after he's finished casting his first totem. Range players need to make sure they keep an eye out for this totem, just to make sure they're not in range of the fire breath. Once in this final corner, all the adds should be finished off. Whilst it's not vital that they die perfectly stacked right in the corner, it just helps when the new adds spawn from them during Phase 3. As the adds are killed off, range players need to move away from the middle of the room because you don't want to get caught by Bonsamdi when he spawns at the start of Phase 2, and Rastakhan is dragged towards the entrance to the room after the second Scorching Detonation. At this point, you'll want to push into Phase 2.
So this is one of the harder phases. Bonsamdi's aura that applies the stacking dot ticks harder and the aura range is much larger. Instead of doing a normal tank swap every single Scorching Detonation, we feel it's easier just to in fact let the Bonsamdi tank die at a large amount of stacks and battle res them afterwards. This happens twice throughout the phase around the 40 stack mark. Resto Shamans are perfect for this job as they are able to Ankh Totem the death, allowing you to save combat reses. Just note after the res from the totem, you will be low health, so you do not want to taunt Bonsamdi immediately. We have two healers stick towards this side of the room to keep an eye on the tank and top him fast after using the Ankh Totem. Ultimately, if you do not have Resto Shamans, then you can just do this phase like you did on Heroic. You'll just need pretty strong spot healing into the tanks to keep them healthy, and you'll definitely want to use cooldowns when you have high stacks and are about to get hit by the Death's Caress. Now whilst tanking Bonsamdi in this phase, you want to make sure that he is furthest away from the raid, and the tank that's responsible for him is between Bonsamdi and the healers. This will allow the healers to stand just outside the aura's radius while still being within range of the tank. This just basically means only the tank gets the stacks, not the healers. Now speaking of shamans in general, they're also insane for this phase because of Tremor Totem. The Zombie Dust Totem on Mythic will mind control two players, and with all the passive cleave that DPS classes do right now, it's super easy to get the mind control players low, especially if they're in melee. Two shamans however can rotate their Tremor Totems for each Zombie Dust mind control and remove it instantly off of them. DPS will still need to swap to the totem before it retargets someone else, but it does allow you to do it without potentially killing a mind control player. If you do not have any shamans, just be super careful when killing these totems, and make sure that the mind control players are crowd controlled, ideally away from the totems themselves. The last important thing to mention for this phase is the Death Store debuff on random players. We set up 4 world markers at the entrance of the encounter in a formation that allows for a safe spot for the downstairs group for Phase 3. It's a loose semicircle with a gap on one side to allow people to move into it without actually going through the death rifts themselves. Throughout Phase 2 you want 4 Death Store debuffs to expire, 1 for each marker. If your DPS is relatively high, you might need to stop damage on Rastakhan to allow the 4th debuff to spawn. If you push with any less than 4, then your safe spot isn't going to be very safe. Now when placing your debuff, it's a good idea to have your camera in a bird's eye view just to make sure you're placing the rift directly on top of the marker. If any of them are slightly off, you might have issues downstairs. But as for the rest of Phase 2, you just want to continue dodging the Plague of Fire, which will also now target melee players. Just make sure that you guys are pre-spread as well as everyone else, and as well, of course, you'll have the Toads. Just continue to dodge them or soak them.
Once Rastakhan gets to 60% health, Phase 3 will begin and Bonsamdi will grip the nearest 10 players to himself and they will enter the Death Realm. We send down ranged DPS and 2 healers. Downstairs isn't all that different to Heroic, except the orbs floating around deal far more damage, and it's important that you get out of the phase as soon as possible to help the guys upstairs. By having this safe spot by the door, ranged DPS can just plow DPS into Bwonsamdi without having to worry about moving from most of the orbs. This isn't perfect, occasionally one or two will go through, but ultimately it can be covered by healers popping cooldowns. You don't need cooldowns at any other point in the fight, so saving everything before you go down and just using them whenever you need to is definitely the best way of going about it. Whilst down here you will also be gaining the stacking dot just like you did on Heroic. This dot gets pretty nasty around the 10 stack mark, so ideally you'll want to reset before that point. You do however need to be careful as the damage you deal to the upstairs group is way higher than what it was on Heroic when you reset your stacks. To help manage the damage, we split the 10 downstairs players into 4 separate groups and call them to reset group by group. We make people reset early as you enter the phase just to make sure that all the stacks are staggered. This doesn't have to be perfect, it's just important that you never have more than 3 people reset at the exact same time and you never get excessive stacks reaching say the 15 stack mark. The only other difference downstairs is the inevitable end cast. The pull in effect on Mythic is way stronger, to the point where you cannot outrun it without a movement speed increase. This becomes problematic with this strategy where you're so close to the rifts, as you are going to all be pulled through the rifts at the exact same time, reset, dealing lethal damage to all the players upstairs. However, this is completely countered by using a speed totem. If your DPS is strong enough, you should only see the inevitable end cast once, so you should only need 1 shaman, but we do send 2 down just in case something goes wrong. As this is the hardest phase, you'll also want Bloodlust down here, and save all your DPS cooldowns just before you do go down. Doing so will definitely help you only see 1 inevitable end cast. Aside from that, you also need to know that when Bwonsamdi does get close to 50% health, you'll need a single player to go within melee range of him. For some reason, if no one is close to him, he won't always transition and instead will just continue to cast spells. We just have a mage blink directly over the wall of rifts and just stand next to him. And that's all you need to know for this phase, but we should mention this isn't the only strategy. Some guilds instead just send down melee or a mix and simply just dodge all of the orbs. This isn't something we have much experience with, so we cannot give that much insight. Just know that this strategy is a little harder to heal as you're going to be spread out. Damage is likely to be lower because you're going to have to move so much, meaning you might see 2 inevitable end casts. And people of course have to be far more responsible with dodging orbs as they don't have a wall of rifts essentially carrying them. It does however mean that you don't need to be perfect with the placements of the death doors during phase 2, so that's something you'll have to weigh up yourself. But with all of that out of the way, let's talk about what happens upstairs.
So the moment the phase starts, all 3 ads will reactivate. We use a Ring of Peace to knock them into the wall and have pre-assigned crowd control that follows immediately afterwards. These ads can be crowd control for 60 seconds before they become immune. You can however reapply crowd control just before that immunity kicks in to give you another 10 seconds or so of CC. Now ideally the downstairs group should be done within around 90 to 100 seconds, meaning that you shouldn't have only half of the raid dealing with the ads for very long. Whilst the ads are crowd controlled, you just need to deal with the normal Rastakhan mechanics and out-heal the damage of players resetting downstairs. We set up healing cooldowns upstairs, so each scorching detonation on the tank has at least 1 healing cooldown, even something minor, as the detonation damage plus some groups downstairs resetting can get pretty dangerous. After progressing this boss, we decided to no longer crowd control the rage. He doesn't really do any raid-wide damage and the tank smash can be dodged, so ultimately it's only spot healing on the tank that needs to be dealt with. Having him up means that DPS upstairs can cleave onto him, whilst they continue to deal damage to Rastakhan. It's something that you may want to consider doing, as it does help kill the ads off faster, as they do need to die eventually. Just note that you must not kill any of the ads before the downstairs group is finished, as otherwise they will then spawn in the death realm, and you'll wipe very quickly without a tank down there. Once the ads break free after around 70 seconds or so, this is the sketchiest part of the fight. Just be ready to soak the patches and spot heal players targeted by the focused demise, and keep in mind, you do not have to save anything for the last phase, it's super easy, so this point is where you want to be using personal, DPS, healing and tank cooldowns. Just make it through this final part of phase 3 and it's essentially a kill. We use Bloodlust upstairs for these ads when cooldowns align, and they're killed very shortly after the downstairs comes back from the death realm.
Once the ads are killed off, you'll finally have the final phase, and absolutely nothing is different here, except there is way more orbs flying around the room. We typically try and keep the boss and raid on one side of the room, and slowly move over towards the other side of the room whenever a certain area feels overpopulated with rifts. But aside from that, it's heroic. You need to spread for the Plague of Fire and dodge the frogs, and the orbs of course, move far away as a tank when you're targeted with a Scorching Detonation. Typically you'll want to try and place the Death Door debuffs up against walls if you can, but ultimately it's not that important. And of course, don't get caught when Inevitable End is cast. And the last piece of advice we can really give you in this phase is don't stand too close to any of the rifts, as it does make dodging new orbs that little bit more difficult. But that's all you need to know, do those simple things, and the boss will die very quickly.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like a recap for anything that we discussed in this guide, or would just like some handy notes ready for your raid, then do go and check out our work over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description below. And we'll catch you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.